Good afternoon. Welcome to the 14th edition of On the Menu. I'm Bob Patillo, your host today. It is June the 25th, and our guest today is Mr. Lance Grace. Lance, how are you?
Doing great.
Thank you for being here today. I would like to start off talking a little bit about you and your family and how you ended up in Alamogordo. If I remember right, you told me one time that you were in the military for a while, but I can't remember if it was the Air Force or the Coast Guard. So you'll have to clarify that for us a little bit.
Yeah, it was the Coast Guard. Yeah, I drove a boat over here one day. I came here, I was in the Air Force. I came here in 1989, actually all of a sudden from Edwards. Got here in fall of 89, and I've been here since. What was assignment that could have lasted from a couple of months to a couple of years actually ended up my last 6 years in the Air Force were here, which was a very long time. And retired here in 95 and brought my family with me. That's my wife, Kathy. And then I have three kids that a lot of people know. Two of them, Brittany and Tyler, both live here in Alamogordo. My third, Clayton, actually is in the Air Force, and he's at Pax River, Maryland right now.
Okay. Lance, where did you grow up?
I grew up in, I was born in Chicago. I grew up in a suburb on the south side called Blue Island. That's it was a railroad town. There was actually one terminal of the Rock Island Railroad. Rock Island went from Blue Island to Rock Island. And life was great. Just a kid playing softball, swimming, doing all those things that kids do. And at the end of high school, I went left and went to the Air Force Academy for 4 years. Are you going to ask me these things? I guess I'm just rambling.
So no, it's fine. This is what we want to know.
Yeah. So from at the academy, I left with a couple degrees, astronautical engineering and engineering sciences, and left there. Went to Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. That was east of Phoenix. It used to be it was the crown jewel of Apollo training. That's where everybody wanted to go. And it was also the busiest airport in the world in those days. It got there in 75. Nowadays, it's not even an Air Force base. It's a part of ASU. I think it's Arizona State Tech or something like that. And so on pilot training, I finished that at the end of 76. I met my wife, who was going to ASU, Arizona State, but she was actually from Illinois too, so maybe it's one of those birds of a feather type thing. And we were married in 77, stayed there for another few years as a T-38 instructor. And you'll probably say, should I say what next? I'll go through my Air Force thing real quick. I went down to Homestead, Florida, learned how to fly F-4s, went over to Germany from there, Hahn Air Base, Germany. And I'm so far the three bases, Williams closed, Homestead's closed, and Hahn is closed. And came back from Germany, went to Seymour Johnson, North Carolina. That's still open. Still flying F-4s. In 85, I went to test pilot school at Edwards. That's in California. Spent a year in school, a year after school flying F-4s, A-7s for test support. Then I went down to the F-15 Combined Test Force, flew F-15s, F-15E. I'm one of the first guys to fly that plane, and then in A-7s. So anyway, then I ended up coming here in 1989. Here I was the Flight Test Squadron Commander, and I flew T-38s for support, but flew F-15s and F-16s, and had a whole bunch of other planes out there. Had a real interesting time. So retired in 95.
Okay, my favorite question to ask you about your military career is how many different planes did you fly?
I've flown, don't know exactly, but between about 55 or so military airplanes, mostly fighters. But I've flown a bunch of heavies too. I've flown F5, C5, had to check ride in C-130, 141s, a whole bunch of different planes. And that was part of being a test pilot, is that we flew lots of different planes so that you have a broader focus on what's going on than just concentrating on one. But the planes I flew most were the F4, most time in the F4, T-38s, F-15 would be third, and then the A-7, F-16. Those are the planes I flew the most.
Okay, great. Well, I understand that you have a video you would like to show us.
Yeah, I think this kind of applies. So we'll sit back, and it's a commercial too.
Holy smoke! Come on, Dad. Come on.
This was before you were born.
Hey,
It's a
come back
classic.
here.
Welcome to my garage. Go ahead, look around. That is the original 240Z. It's a real beauty. This is the first small truck in America. Dogs love trucks. Over here.
Whoa, but this thing hauls.
It won 3 consecutive world championships.
Cool.
Any car can get you where you need to go. A special car gets you there with a smile on your face. Remember, young man, life is a journey. Enjoy the ride.
Okay, Lance, for those that are listening to this that couldn't see the video, can you very briefly describe it and tell us why you thought it was important?
Okay, I think what comes out of that is life is a journey. Enjoy the ride, and whatever you're doing, you better be thinking that. It's not we all have goals and everything, but the trying to get to that goal is where the real enjoyment. The achieving it, yeah, but that's short. It's getting there. That's so much that is what life is all about. So that video actually starts off as a little kid. With video, it's a commercial. It was a famous commercial because everybody loved it. Nobody had any idea what car company made it. So it's kind of in the advertising world. Actually, I was surprised that it actually does say Nissan on the end. I didn't think that it kind of goes down in history that nobody remembers who the car company was. But anyway, hey, I was a kid like that. We played softball all the time, all summer, swimming, things like that, chasing dogs and little girls and riding bikes and all that kind of stuff. And what we're talking about today is actually business and how you should be looking at this. And I'm going to show you how it started when I was a little tiny dude. And so I was that little kid in that commercial, and I'm that old guy in that commercial too. That's talking to the kid. And I think that's Bob's intention with all this was try to pass it on to another generation or two, what we were all doing. And so I think that video applies to what we'll be talking about today.
Okay. Would you like to go over your 11 lessons for business? Can we do that? Talk about number one?
Actually, Bob, let me talk about my business experience, and then we'll go through them.
Okay.
So I've thought about this. Where did my business experience really start? My business experience started when I was in kindergarten, and I lived between 2 high schools. The high schools were the freshman and sophomore school, and then the junior senior. So I had to walk between them all the time. There's a little store called Burke's. It was a corner store, and they'd stop there and buy some Cokes or whatever. And then they'd walk along, and then they'd ditch the bottles in the bushes. So when I was about 5 years old, I thought, I saw, wow, every single one of those bottles is worth 2 cents, unless it was a quart and it was worth a nickel. So I'd get my little wagon, and I'd drive, pulled up the street and crawl in the bushes and collect bottles. And then I'd pull them down to Burke's. And I remember the first time I went there, they were muddy and everything. He said he didn't want those bottles, they're full of mud. So I'd stop off and I'd wash them off in the water, that's old stinky water on the side of the railroad tracks, then bring them in nice and clean and smelly. So that's where I started. My biggest, just a boom. I just couldn't believe it. I thought I'd just run into unbelievable amount of cash. is during the JFK running for president in 1959. I was 7 years old. Well, I was probably 6 and then turned 7. And I found out this deal that I could go deliver campaign stuff. And I can't remember how much I got paid, but it was something like $25. And I used that same wagon, ran around, did the whole thing, came on back, and I got 2 more of those. And I had, like, at that age, the amount of money I made off that was unbelievable. It was like hitting the jackpot. So anyway, that's I did all kinds of stuff from that point on, and until I went to the academy, and then I had 25 years of no real business. In reality, in the Air Force, as a test pilot and in test and acquisition, I was in the part of the Air Force where we did deal with money. One of the few parts of the military that does. So I actually ran a business in the Air Force, but my amount that I won and lost out of that came up to 0. So it didn't matter how well you did or didn't do. There was no more money involved with that. So got in business later on. So,
Lance, would you care to talk to us a little bit about the types of businesses that you've been involved in since you got out of the military?
When I first got out of the military, I was asked to be the executive director for it was called the executive director of the New Mexico Office of Space Commercialization. So that was the spaceport, pre-spaceport. And I was asked to actually be part of I was only going to do that for 6 months, associated with the source selection for the X-33, and that was the shuttle replacement. But at the end of that, I actually stayed on for a year, and we did the original business plan for the spaceport. And at the end of that, I'd already been involved now with government for many years, and I had specifically decided not, after my Air Force career, I didn't really want to be a government type of guy. Didn't want to be paid by the government anymore or employed by the government. So the first stuff I did is I became one of the 4 owners of a government contractor, a DoD contract, and we did low observables, which is stealth. I kind of interesting. I did some air vehicles, but actually mostly surface combatants, which are Navy ships, and combat vehicles. So I did all kinds of weird things with them, and we did that a lot of that work right around here. But I travel a lot too. And the one thing that our company did was actually it's the DDG-1000. That's a Zumwalt class destroyer. A very unique ship. It's the stealthiest ship, surface combatant ever built. Looks different, and we developed the infrared suppressor system right here, actually right up in the mountains for that. And that was my part of that. And so I was involved with that for quite a while, still peripherally. And there are offshoots from that. Actually, during the same time, I had a hobby, but I had a paid hobby, and I flew F4s for 7 years for Trade Corps, followed by BAA Systems. That was out of Mojave. And I used to, Pax River, Parker's Point to Hawaii, go out to Hawaii at times for a few weeks down to Point Magoo, Puerto Rico, Roosevelt Roads, Puerto Rico. Went over to Egypt a dozen times in the process of picking up and ferrying Egyptian F4s back and forth. And so anyway, it was the best paid hobby there ever was. And I did that for 7 years while I was actually, while I was doing all the other stuff. The offshoots from the first company were a couple other companies that I either own or are part owner of too. And they had to do with a material that we developed that gets rid of particulates. And very specifically, I have a number of patents to get rid of particulates in wood burning operations. And that stuff is still going on too. And no more offshoots from that. I have something, my pop bottles and JFK literature and paper routes and all that kind of stuff. Back in those days, I bought Dreyfus funds when I was in junior high, probably starting off with probably $50 of them, whatever. I bought my first house in Arizona using that for down payment. that house I had in Arizona was my bachelor's pad, and then I sold it, I think 26 years later. It was rented like continuously except for about 3 weeks in those years. And then that started my mini storage here. So my mini storage that out on Hamilton, that actually started with, no kidding, pop bottles out of bushes along the street. And it's how life works. A lot of people think that you need somebody has to drop all this money, or you have to have a wealthy uncle or whatever. But no, I'm serious. There was nothing else. It just starts one place, and you just keep on going from one thing to another. So the businesses I have right now are that I have the environmental stuff. There's land, a number of some land and different companies associated with that. And in town, I have the mini storage. And I have portable storage here in Albuquerque and Colorado Springs. That's where I spend most of my time on that stuff nowadays. I've got rid of all the defense stuff and let all my clearances go a few years ago, so I don't have to deal with that stuff anymore.
Let's talk about integrity in business and in life in general. Tell me your thoughts on that.
I think it's the most crucial thing there is, period, above everything. And after I was out of the Air Force came up with their core, I think it's core principles, I think they call it. And so the first is integrity first, service before self, and excellence. Excellence in all we do. And you would think that number 3 would be number 1 in most people's mind, but it isn't. Integrity is the most important. I don't care what it is. In business and life, it's in leadership, in personal relationships, and in absolutely everything. And you need to be, it needs to be part of whatever you do in business. It needs to be part of every relationship that you have with any human being, period. So that's why I have that number 1 there, and it's number 1 above everything else.
Do you think integrity is a competitive advantage?
Yes, it is. But integrity may be a competitive disadvantage in the short term. In the long term, it wins out. But I could talk about this subject a whole lot. But in the long term, it wins out, and more than that, it wins out with you, because you don't ever have to worry about remembering what you told anybody or whatever, because it's always just going to be the truth, period. So you don't have to sit around thinking about what you told somebody, because it's what you would have told anybody else.
Have you ever, in your business or your military career, witnessed somebody who did not demonstrate integrity and it cost them? And if so, how? You don't have to give specific examples if you don't want to, but.
Well, in the first place, the Air Force wouldn't be like the Academy. And the Academy, actually, it turns out that the Academy set the culture for each arm of the military. And at the Academy, there is an honor code, and the honor code was similar to the Navy and Army, but it had a very, very different part of it, because it finished up with nor tolerate anyone who will. And it was called the Toleration Clause. And yes, ran into that at the Academy, huge. And it sounds like being a snitch, but it's not a snitch. It's you don't tolerate it, period. And we all did it, and we all lived that way. And it turns out that it's actually an easy thing to live with. If you see something, it is your responsibility to report it. I'm talking about integrity. I'm not talking about regulations. There's a major difference. Yeah, I've broken a few regs in my life, measured in the tens of thousands, but that's not integrity. Integrity is lying, stealing, cheating.
Okay. One time you told me that leadership is always the reason for failure, but not always the reason for success. I've never heard that before. Tell me about that.
Well, what happens is that you can have an organization where you have, and I'm talking about the top leader. If you go to an organization and that organization has failed, it's really easy, because it always ends up being the top leadership. Always, always, always. There's got to be an exception, but I don't know of one. Now the reverse, the corollary, isn't necessarily true, because there are some very lousy leaders, top leaders, that could have a very strong, great people below, and the next level of leadership is so strong that they can overcome the top and keep the organization on track, and end up very successful. And I've seen this both in the military, and we've all seen this in the outside world. We've seen it all over the place, where you can have a terrible leader and yet that organization is doing fine. At some level, that organization has strong leadership. So.
You told me something that's contrary to usual wisdom or usual thought. You told me that the customer is not always right. I've always heard that the customer is always right, but you don't have that theory.
Absolutely not. It's a cliche. Now you ought to you go in with the proper respect, the proper approach with everybody. You don't have any of those preconceived things. But I'll just tell you what, I'll just pick my mini storage. My mini storage, I've had 2 murderers, and I've had the most prolific criminal in maybe the history of this town as customers. So I think those are pretty good examples that I wouldn't trust their opinion on them being customers. But not just right. A lot of customers, this is not necessarily a negative thing. A lot of customers, they come to you wanting something, but they really don't. They know that they need something, but they really don't need. They don't know what that is. So you help them decide, and I think this is where integrity comes in. Is that I don't try to sell them something. Maybe I am, but I'm really not trying to sell them something. I'm trying to help them figure out what they really need, so that they make the right choice. And so I think that's where integrity comes in. But the other thing is, you got to listen to your customer, and you can figure out you ask them a series of questions until you know. You've been around this for a while, so you can figure out what they really need. In a way, it's kind of like, I'll pick a place in town, Salmon's. I think they're renowned for, you walk into Salmon's and you kind of go, I got a leaky sink, and you have no clue. By the time you walk out of that place, you'll have exactly the right piece or part, because they know. So you use they're helping their college or their customer figure out what they really want.
Okay. So in that vein, did you ever have any formal business training other than what you learned in the military? So I guess what I'd like to know is, do you have an MBA, or do you have an?
I don't have an MBA, but I have masters in management, and there was a lot of business. I'd probably say a very significant portion of that was business related, and in a couple of differences. There's leaders and there's managers. Those are 2 totally different things, by the way. And I think a lot of business people don't understand the difference between them. And you manage things, you lead people is real basic. And actually, I learned that in the Air Force, but I learned management actually through additional areas. And yes, I've had a lot of outside stuff in reality. One of those will be, we'll talk. I gave some things we're going to be talking about. I'll bring up some other stuff I learned a long time ago, but I actually understand what they mean now. Not necessarily know how it works, but.
You told me one time that in his farewell address, George Washington cautioned against entangling alliances.
Yes.
What the heck does that mean?
That means what he was referring to is actually making deals with Europe, and making treaties. And a few years later, things don't quite go the way that you had planned, and you get in wars and all that kind of stuff. You get drawn down the wrong path. What that demonstrates is that's in business. It's kind of funny. I'm looking at Bob because he and I can both relate to this. And you have to be very careful who you get into business with. I'm not even necessarily talking about integrity. I'm talking about everyone has different goals, and your goals in life, they change as you go through life. So you may have this partner that that in your business, and yeah, I mean, you match up perfectly. You want to do exactly the same things. Next thing happens, you both get married, and suddenly this one relationship that you have turns into, I think it's 6. And then it starts, the goals start getting a little modified. Then some kids come along, and the mother-in-law and whoever. But let's just say that your goals in life start changing. So suddenly, what you thought was this totally compatible situation just isn't anymore in business. This is a risk-reward thing. But you just have to be very careful. You really have to think about what your relationships are with partners, the financiers, or whatever it is in business, because I'll just guarantee you that they do not remain the same. Now that's what I'm talking about actually corresponds with getting married too, but that's somebody that you have made a incredible commitment to, and that you both love each other. So as your goals are changing, you change together. But in a business environment, that just might not be that way. And that's unfortunately why we have so many lawyers around nowadays, right? So,
Right.
So just be real careful. There are rewards with having partners, from experiences, from the being able to raise money and all that kind of stuff. But there are many disadvantages too. So it's one of those balancing acts.
Lance, if you've ever had a partner that didn't work out in a business, what did you learn from that situation?
I learned what I was just talking about. I'm trying to think if there's I learned that I made some not poor choices, or maybe poor choices. I made some bad analysis, and each time you do that, I'll just say that if you think everything's going to go exactly right the way that you plan in business, you're fooling yourself. But you should learn from each one of these examples as you go through life. And one of those things that I'll just say that right now is that pretty much made a commitment that my only partner is going to be my wife, and we'll keep it that way for now on. And some of the things earlier on worked very well, worked extremely well. So I have experiences both good and bad.
When you've had partners that worked well, what were a couple of the reasons it did so?
Well, the first thing is that you can talk to each other real well. You don't have to hold anything back. That's so important with everything. There's not, we've all dealt with people where you don't hit, you have to be careful about certain subjects that you're going to tiptoe around or whatever. That always gets in the way. When you can just be totally open, everything just ends up so much smoother in the long run. And so that's, I like the open discussions, open working together. It's I've had some great relationships with this. Okay. So.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. You and I talked one time about managing your accounts receivables is very important in a business. Tell me why you think that.
Well, see, I learned way back there in one of the courses we were talking about earlier with management, and they talked about all this stuff about accounts receivable. And when you're young and naive and stupid like I was, you kind of go, well, what are they really talking about? That's, you get a bill and you pay the bills, and, you go on with life. Do you have 30 days to pay it or 90 days to pay it? Then you get in business and then realize that there's a certain number of people that you do business with that have no intention of ever paying you. There's a whole bunch of other people that have an intention of paying you and then come out that you are on a lower priority, so they don't. And then a whole bunch of others that there are certain people that had good intentions and everything else, and just something happens in their life, they can't pay you. So the bottom line is accounts receivable is I didn't understand it back then, but that's the place where you need to have a major focus on of how you get your bucks. And I always I always use I don't know if any of the Ramseys out there, but I always use McDonald's as one of the great businesses because they have two windows. The first window you hand over your money, and the second window you get your product. I kind of love that concept because it just doesn't work that way for me. They get the product first, and I may or may not get the money later on. And but that's just the way it is. And I'm not a bank, and I'm not the government, so I don't have this. I can't screw them down. And so accounts receivables are unbelievable. So focus there.
Have you mastered the art of your accounts receivables at this point in your life?
Is there anybody out there that has? If you've got it, please call me. Because no.
It's a work in progress still.
It's a work in progress, but I'll tell you what, communication is huge. Without trying to be annoying, I don't know. I have not. I am as far from being a master of that as anybody can be.
Cash, checks, and credit cards, are they all the same?
No. And I used to think they did. I used to live this is 40 years ago. I used to have maybe a buck or two of cash in my pocket, and I had credit cards, and I'd use a cash or a checkbook occasionally. And here's what I know from business. And I'm not talking about the black market with cash. I'm not talking about the off the grid stuff. I'm just talking about everything straight. Everyone's paying taxes, doing all the stuff properly. Cash is real. It's sitting there. It is there. Checks bounce. It's kind of interesting. So I don't have, but interesting is I don't have as many checks bouncing as I do credit cards. Credit cards are declined, and then the latest scam is, I almost hate to bring this up because I'll just assume that we don't have those people out there on the line here. But I've learned about this recently is that credit cards, people go on in if it's a big bill, they'll pay it by credit card. And then they'll go to their bank and they'll say, hey, what's that? And the tie goes to the consumer, not to the company. And I've run into companies that have lost many tens of thousands of dollars from people who pay with their credit cards on big bills and then get their bank to scrub them afterwards. And kind of interesting. That's one of the latest fads. So it doesn't work with cash. I guess maybe unless it was counterfeit, but cash actually works. So I now look at all those things in a different light. There are advantages to credit cards because it's fast. It's like everything else. It's a risk reward thing, and but just realize that there are issues with some of these things.
Lance, tell me about the importance of learning from others.
Huge. That's what Bob is doing right here is just fantastic because this is a formalized method of doing it. And there's people out there, everything that you're trying to do right now, there's a whole bunch of people out there been there, done that, either did it right or screwed it up. But the other part of it is what I found is that if you ever want to learn something from somebody, just go ask them because it's amazing. People will tell you, especially if it's their pride and joy, they will tell you everything about it. So if you wanted to know, in fact, it's how I really got, when I did mini storage, when I was about to do that, I sold my house, my bachelor's pad, and then turned that to the first couple of buildings, my mini storage. I was traveling a lot back then. So I'd be driving down the road and I'd be running just a little bit early. So believe it or not, I was running early at times. I would stop on by and just go into a mini storage and I'd just talk to them about it. And you just tell them who you are, what you're looking into, and they will tell you absolutely everything. They'll go into intimate detail because it's their baby, and they're proud of it, and they'll let you know. And that works in every single business. It's amazing. I mean, you could go to your competitor. Your competitor will tell you. It's communications work at this. Just you got to problem pipe up. So I'm sitting in the Chamber of Commerce right here. This is the center for that activity in this town, and so there's a lot of knowledge around here. And talk to a number of different people. Make your decision. Use them as advice. So it works.
Okay, the next thing I have is you said that the largest obstacles and corresponding expenses come from one source, the government.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll just bring up one example. So, I have been doing something since February that should have been done in a matter of weeks. I just got it accomplished. This is 4.5 months later, and this should have been done a couple of weeks. If this was not a government action, it would have been done a couple of weeks, because if whoever you're working with wouldn't have done it that quick, you would have gone to the other company and got it done in a couple of weeks. And so I'm not saying this as a negative government guy. I mean, I was a government guy in multiple governments. But it's just the nature of government, and government and business are two totally different things. And the obstacle to business is government. I mean, we'll go through all these permits and whatever else, the fees and everything else that you want to think of. I mean, they're endless, and everybody in business knows this. Actually, I'm not trying to be political here, but when Trump was running for office, he thought the biggest thing was the taxes. And as he ran around, he found out that's not true. The biggest obstacle are the amount of regulations. And he vowed, or his promise was, to get rid of 2 for every new one. And I don't know how it is now, but a year ago was running at getting rid of 22 for every new one. And there's just too many regulations, period. And there's no way that you can abide by them all, because you don't even know what they all are. But they take time. Even if they don't cost much money, they take time, and time is money. Government doesn't understand that. So just realize that. Yeah, get mad at times, but get over it, because it's just the way it works. And there's some corollaries to that. First of all, if you're going to work with the government, you better know what you're doing. And there's a number of you out there that do that, but it's not easy. There's so much more to the contract. Might sound great, but there is so much more to it that you have to do. And by the way, the rule of thumb, anything government does costs 2.5 times what private enterprise does. That's the rule. That's why you have $600 toilet seats and whatever else. But so if you can get part of that, it looks enticing, but working with the government can be incredibly frustrating. There's a few people out there listening to this that know exactly what I'm talking about. In fact, I'm looking at one, Bob, right?
That's true. Lance, tell me about the importance of managing your time.
It's crucial. It's crucial in everything you do in business, but in life and in school. Where you really had to start learning this was in school. How you go back and forth, and how you get everything done, or at least everything that needs to be done. One of those things in the engineering world, there's a phrase that says, perfect is the enemy of good. Now, you can get real good and get to the 95% solution, but getting those last 5% are going to take as much or more work than the first 95%. So you have to decide, is it something that you need to do that last 5% on? And you kind of go, yeah, but we got to be perfect. I'll just tell you something. There is no such thing as perfect. So it's in an engineering, you have specifications so that you meet the specs, and you don't want to go beyond the specs, because if you do, the time and money involved with that is just too much. So it's a time management thing. You got to get the job done. So don't waste your time in these areas where you're not supposed to be wasting your time. The other places, time management, I started learning when I was a kid, because, when I was talking about doing pop bottles and cutting lawns and all that kind of stuff, where my real desire was playing softball, swimming, going camping, all those other things. But I managed them all together. I would disappear for lunch, but I really wasn't at lunch. I was off cutting 2 lawns when everybody else was at lunch, and then I'd show back up on the baseball field. And so you learn those tricks, and that's how you get through it. One of my examples on that, which I thought was just hilarious, was in test ball school, because in my class there were 25 of us, and about half were engineers, and then about a third of the class were foreigners, something like that. So we would be doing something like, let's say we're having a course on differential equations or something, and we hadn't seen anything like this for about a decade, since college. But we had engineers in there that just got out of their doctorate, and their specialty was differential equations or whatever, their math. And so they would be giving us our own students would be giving us some pre-test thing late at night, getting ready for the test. And then we go on the test. Well, the test would be however long it was, 50 minutes or whatever. You have 50 minutes to get as much information out on that piece of paper as possible. You don't have 3 hours. You have 50 minutes. So the engineers, we would go in and the engineers would teach us all this stuff, and then we'd go take the test, and we'd get better on the test than the engineers did. And they were just blown away. But what they didn't know, what they had not done as much as we had, as the pilots had done, was how to manage our time, how to spend our time on the important tasks and blow off all the stuff that didn't matter. So it's something that the engineers learned from us during that year. So there's all kinds of things like that. Another example I always bring up is parallel processing. There used to be the best bartender ever used to be at the Nellis bar. And why that was that as he brought 2 piles of beer out to the tables, he was taking the orders from the other tables for the next set of beer. So you can't do 2 things at once, but what you learn how to do is that it looks like it's everybody else. And you don't do serial processes where you bring the beer out the table, you grab the money, then you walk on back with the money. No, if you're going to be efficient, you do all the stuff, you do multiple processes during that one trip. And so that is, I see that when I walk in the stores, I see that every place I go. I normally don't comment about it, but you want to be a parallel processor. I'll just say that. And that's a time management thing.
Lance, how did you figure out about managing your money?
I think the first thing was that my parents were the product of the Depression. My mom could squeeze a penny for all it's worth, had coupons for everything. And so a lot of this came from my mom. And that sounds like you're stingy. I don't think I'm stingy. I'm not. But you, some of the stuff was forced. So when I first started making money and spending it on pop and pretzels and candy and trips or whatever else, my parents made us, I remember my first savings account. And I told you later on when that got bigger, I bought Dreyfus funds, mutual funds. And so it started literally when you have a nickel dime in it. And my parents taught me this stuff, but also you see it because I hung out with friends whose parents gave them their money to do things. And my other friends had to work all day long. And I figured out how to make money equivalent to my friends who were working all day long, but spending time with all my friends that didn't have jobs and had all the money they wanted. So you start figuring out all the tricks and how they do that. And I don't know. There's people that have been on this and talk about money management. I'll just say that use what works good for you. And if I went through a whole lot of the details of how I do it, a lot of you would just look at me and just say, that's the stupidest way of doing things I've ever heard of. But it works good for me. So learn it through the years.
Hey, Lance, I've got a question for you. I know that you're in your 60s. Would you rather at this point in your life have more time or more money, and why?
Yeah, that's interesting. Right now, in fact, it was your wife that talked about this about 10 years ago. I think there was some kind of book that said the title was something like "What is Enough?" Is that what you probably read it, Bob?
The Number.
Right? Yeah, The Number. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, The Number.
Yeah, The Number. Okay, so we kind of all go through life saying, "Oh man, I'd like to be a gazillionaire," and you kind of, we all got that. But as we go through life, you start going, what really brought you the most pleasure? I'll just tell you what right now is the biggest number one thing pleasure in my life right now, which was never on my list of goals anyplace, not even in the list in my head. And that was my two little granddaughters. They are number one goal, the most unbelievably fantastic thing in my life. And money doesn't have anything to do with it. Zero. So I'm not saying if I was going to be enjoying life, either poor or rich, I'd rather be on the rich end of things. Okay. But I'll tell you what, life is way more than just money. So you end up picking the time. Man, I would love to have more time to do. I have a bazillion projects I'm still interested in doing. I'm not going to, I don't sit around twiddling my thumbs. I used to sleep very little most of my life because I was always doing something. And so my wife says I have adult onset ADHD or whatever, because I drive her crazy. But more time would be fantastic.
Lance, when you die, what would you like your legacy to be? What would you like other people to have said to say about you?
Interesting. Hadn't thought about that. I'm dead, so it doesn't matter. So actually, it's not when I die. I don't have the option to bring that up anymore. So it would probably be something that I went for it. Lance went for it. If that means anything. I didn't. I never took the simple path. I decided there were all kinds of things in life that I took the harder path because part of that risk reward, but also because it was a challenge. So there would be something like that. So I can't. I have to think about that one, Bob.
Okay. I know that you're very proud of your two grandkids. Tell me 2 or 3 other things that you're very proud of that you've had in your life.
There's certain okay, I'll talk about this. There's you start off as a little kid. So I had a goal as a little kid, just like millions of others. And I remember I told a friend of mine I was going to walk on the moon. Actually, I told the same friend who I've had friends since we were 4 years old. And I told him 2 things. He remembers these extremely well, where they happened. One of them was we passed the academy in a bus. And it was when I was at Philmont. And I said, I'm going to go there. And that was 4 years before I went to the academy, Air Force Academy. And he remembers the moment. And so I can pick goals and actually achieve them. The second one was I said that I was with him and I pointed the moon. I said, I'm going to walk on the moon someday. And I'm not going to do that. So that didn't happen. But up to a point, I I was actually chosen to be a shuttle astronaut in 1987. And actually, when I moved here suddenly to Holloman, all the guys at Edwards were saying, "Why are you moving there? Because you're going to go to NASA in a couple months." And it turns out that I didn't. So, but what I ended up, I got called one day saying, no, actually from John Young, who never called the guys, and said, "Hey, Lance, yeah, you're not chosen this year." And so I realigned my goals. That had been a goal for like 28 years, whatever it was. Realigned. It was really easy, by the way. It was not an emotional thing. It's just like, well, okay. But I stayed at Holloman, did all the stuff, and when I when I retired from the Air Force, I was most likely the most experienced test pilot in the military, and my goals changed, and my focus changed, and it was fun, it was great, and when I left the Air Force, I could have gone off to airlines. I didn't do that because I love flying so much. I didn't want to turn it into a routine thing. And I would have been hired by United if I wanted to. And I could have gone to McDonnell Douglas. They asked me to fly 15s at Edwards. I decided not to do that either. I decided actually to go out on my own. I wanted to that hard road. And I'll just tell you, at times it's been tough, but there are rewards. And that's that risk reward. It's a security versus risk. And can you do it? And there's been rewards and there's been failures. And so the failures teach you in a whole lot of ways. So anyway, I've been able to achieve a whole lot of very lofty goals. But I think when it all comes down to it in the end, my friends trust me. I think that's, I have good relationships with people, and it's important to me. And I don't try. It's just normal. It's just the way I am, and I enjoy that. So I'm rambling. My wife would say, "Lance, move on to another subject."
Well, the next subject is, Lance, if knowing what you know now, if you were 30 years old, turn the clock back, what would you do over or do differently in your life, knowing what you know now?
From 30 on, I would have well, all those standard things like buy Apple, Tesla at the right time, all those kind of things. Now, actually, I'm in the big picture. I could tell you all kinds of these other things that in the long run don't really matter. I would have. Life's been good. Life's been really good, and so I really wouldn't have changed my path. I look at that at times. I had some other offers, and they would have been very interesting, but I don't think I would have ended up you're always, even if you're an old guy, you're still changing all the time. And some of those other paths that I may have been lured into, I don't think would have been good for my family and my children, etc. So I'm happy with how everything's gone. How's that? I would have made some better moves with certain relationships or certain business deals I got into, whatever. But hey, that's part of life. I don't have any major regrets.
So you consider yourself a success? You consider that you've had a successful life? That's your point of view?
Oh yeah, but what does success mean? And a lot of people initially put success into money and accoutrements and their status, whatever. And okay, so I've had that kind of stuff, but that's my real definition of success nowadays has really got away from that kind of thing, and turned more into people and relationships. Those are probably. It's kind of interesting how your life changes. Hey, I was that unbelievably aggressive type A plus driver driven person, everything, and I can turn that on right now, but I don't need that anymore. I like people nowadays more than any of the other stuff.
Lance, tell me about a person in your life that had a big influence on you in a positive way.
I had I had several, I would say the older generation would be and they're males for the most part, would be my father. I became extremely close to my father at a somewhat older age. It was actually in high school, and I had to do because he was in an accident. My brother and I suddenly were thrust into running the household, and I was in charge of rehabilitation for my dad and everything else. But I got to know my dad very, very well, and I learned a whole bunch of lessons from him because of the time we spent together. Besides all those lessons that you'd learn as a kid, I kind of got to know him super well when I was 16 years old. So the relationship changed then. Another person would be my scout leader, Boy Scout leader, Delbert Gibson, just a wonderful person. And my relationship with him lasted probably 50 something years. It was very, very close. There were several individuals like this that were very much part of my life, and you don't realize how important they were until later on. When you kind of go, how do I learn this kind of stuff? And it's not just, how to pound a nail or whatever. It's just these lessons of life, how to handle things that happen, the good things and the bad things that in life. And they were there. They taught me all this stuff. So.
Well, Lance, we're getting close to the end. I've got one or two more questions for you. We hear a lot in the news about socialism. I'd like to know what you think about that versus capitalism.
The worst thing that ever happened to mankind is whatever you want to call it, communism, Marxism, Leninism, Democrat socialism, whatever. And it's good for 1 to 200 million murders last century, and it's not there yet this century, but it's the worst thing in life. The capitalism is based on individual responsibility and individual freedom, and I just believe in this stuff so much. And it's not rhetoric, it's not banners on the wall running around or whatever. It's just a fact of life if you want to if you have learned from history. So I am an unbelievable major believer in capitalism is a great thing for mankind, for every human. And socialism is equivalent, I think, of death, just as it's terrible. How's that for short and
good? I like it.
Not ambivalent.
The last thing, Lance, as we wrap this up, if you had somebody who is graduating high school right now that you know, and they ask you for some advice, tell me a couple of things you would tell
them. The first thing is you'd say, what do you want to do? And most will go, well, I don't know, just, and even the ones who do know what they want to do, think they know what they want to do, they probably do. So you have to kind of talk to them a little bit and kind of go, okay, what do you really want to do? So a lot of people are afraid to bring that up because they say, well, yeah, but I could never do that. I don't believe in that at all. So the next thing is, once you figure out what you want to do, it's like, okay, what do you have to do in order to get there? Because it just doesn't happen overnight. So what's the process? What do you have to do? What's going to help you achieve that? And, if you go through all these courses and everybody out there is going to say, well, you got to write them down. Actually, writing them down is not a bad idea. And I'll tell you what, I have a number of literally napkins that I save because they were the initiation of huge things that came out of that. And you don't have to this is not a formal presentation you give anybody, but you got to scribble them down, then stick them on a computer, stick them someplace where you know where they are so you can keep track of this and keep pressing forward. All through life, one of the examples I bring up, and it happened to do with this one mission back in Seymour Johnson, where there were I think there were 4 2 ships that went out to fight F-16s for the afternoon. And the only two ship that made it to the tanker was my two ship. I was actually on the wing, Spanky Spangle. He taught me a life lesson. On the way down, we had to get to the tanker, and because we needed fuel in order to do this, and kept on getting routed from ATC off track, and Spanky would just bring the plane back because we knew where the tanker was because we could interrogate his transponder. So we just keep on turning back and head for the tanker. The other two ships didn't do that. They got distracted and they ran out of fuel, didn't get to the tanker. We're the only ones who made it to the tanker, and we spent the whole afternoon fighting F-16s. It was a blast. It was on a day before F-16s had a radar missile, so we beat up on all the F-16s. It was humiliating, and it was just it was so much fun. But the lesson from it is stay focused on where you're trying to get, and everything's going to try to distract you. They're going to have everything come along is going to try to distract you. Don't lose focus. Get back on course. Keep going that way. So anyway.
All right. Lance, thank you so much for your time. We're so lucky to have you and your family here in Alamogordo. We appreciate your service and flying 50-something different planes in the military, which I think is unheard of. So thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your time. And we'll see all of you next week. Thank you.
See you, Bob, and everybody else out there.